Being isolated and alone can lead to many different things happening to someone. Here we're going to look at 3 allegedly true stories about being isolated and alone, whether it be at home or on public transport, or in the case of our last story, alone in a field. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want more horror content. But for now, let's begin with our first story. This happened when I was in high school. I won't say where for my identity's sake, or in case the person in question finds me. Even though this was a very long time ago. Call me paranoid, but this is just how I work. This was before every high schooler known to man had their own cell phone, so when I was too sick to go to school, I had to rely on the good old landline. At first, everything was just fine. I was sitting on the couch, watching TV when the phone started to ring. The rain outside almost made me miss it, so I ignored it at first, but yet it was still the early morning. My mom wouldn't have gotten to work yet. But it kept ringing, so I got up to get the phone. When I answered, nothing. When I looked at the caller ID, it was labeled as unknown. Strange. I had never seen that happen before. I hung up the phone and returned to watching my cartoons. Yes, even as a teenager, I still watched cartoons. But then 5 minutes later, they called again. No answer or reply. This happened about 3 more times and I was beginning to panic. So I decided to call my mom and let her know what was happening, but she didn't pick up. Frustrated, I decided that maybe I would unplug the landline for now and maybe wait a while. But the idea of getting in trouble with my parents over it got the best of me. In hindsight, this was a really stupid decision. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time I picked it up with a more angry response, but this time a whispering voice spoke to me over the phone.
I know you're alone.
I screamed and hung up the phone, unplugging it from the wall before curling up on the couch. I did this for about 20 minutes before I heard a loud knock on my front door. It wasn't a friendly knock either, it was loud. It was angry, with each pound on the wood of my door.
I know you're in there. Why don't you come open the door for me? Come on. I know you're alone in there.
It was clear he was using the intercom at the front of my door. I hated these old school houses sometimes, thinking back on it. I ran to my room and locked the door, hiding away as I heard the knocking continue. I didn't know what to do at this stage except hide. I hid for what felt like hours. Eventually, the knocking stopped and I heard the phone ring again. I was afraid to pick it up, but I braved the frightening walk back to the living room to pick up the phone and answer. With a breath of relief, it was my mom. I explained what had happened, and of course she said I was being paranoid. Maybe I was half asleep and imagined it. Back then, things like that didn't happen, so of course she didn't believe me. I never experienced anything after that, and I wasn't sure who it was or what they wanted, but it couldn't have been good. My mysterious caller, if you're out there, please, let's never talk again. There is no doubt that we are in somewhat peculiar situation these days. Quarantines, full isolation, and generally strict calls to stay at home. These have become our new everyday life. The streets are empty. Public transport runs almost empty carriages, and what is left is a purely visual society devoid of people. Unfortunately, people with dubious intentions can use this to their advantage. At midnight yesterday, I was on my way home, alone. As I get on the bus and sit down, I almost immediately register a man on the other side of where I am sitting. He took a keen interest in me. Very clear interest. He fixes his gaze firmly on me, almost the entire way. I gradually start to get a little uncomfortable, and a couple of occasions allow myself to let my eyes wander accidentally across the bus to confirm to myself that I am indeed being watched. Which I keep getting confirmed as he refuses to take his eyes off me. Not only does his behavior worry me at this point, but also his appearance in general, where he sits wearing a large outer jacket with the hood pulled out well over his head. with a clear focus on hiding the lower part of his face with the help of the neck of his jacket. It was similar to the function of a Finnish cap. Back was only the sight of two big, dark, intense eyes that wouldn't leave me alone. When we get to the point where I have to change from bus to subway, he follows. I make a few random small stops here and there to check departures, with the intention of watching his movements, of which he stops. I expected this. He then follows me down onto the platform, where he clearly stands and watches me from a distance. I'm now waiting for the train, and I'm beginning to feel the fear that he will follow me all the way to the end station of where I'm going to get off. The train line tune arrives, and I am currently alone, and I decide to get on one of the carriages to give the impression that I'm going that way, and then get off again before the doors close for departure. Both to mislead the man, but also get confirmed to myself that he is indeed after me. That it's just not me being paranoid. Once again, suspicion is confirmed. He gets into the carriage, but when he turns around and sees that I've got off again, he also gets off and stands back on the platform. Now, my anxiety is really starting to kick in. Finally, the line 4 arrives, and I stand a bit waiting before I go in. Then strategically slip in the second the doors close. He does the same. I then sit down in the front seat in the front carriage with my back to the cab. This is to make sure he has no opportunity to move behind me where I sit with a full view of the entire carriage. Unsurprisingly, he walks towards me and sits in the seats directly in front of me. He leans back with his arm resting over the backs of his seats and fixes his gaze upon me, occasionally interrupted by him standing up and pacing a little relentlessly back and forth, then to sit down again. I feel my heart pounding away, and that my breathing was becoming harder to keep in check. Nevertheless, I try my best to appear unaffected by it all, as I don't want him to see that I'm scared. But at the same time, it's becoming more and more challenging for me to keep a cool head and think clearly. A little beyond us sits another slightly younger guy. I hope, with everything that I am, that he will be with the train all the way to the terminus, so that I have to get off alone with the man who follows me and can ask to be accompanied home. There are now only 3 of us left on the track, and as I feared at most at this point, the other guy is starting to get ready to get off at the next stop, 2 stops before mine. Now the adrenaline really kicks in, and I realize I should act fast, as after I have no idea what this mildly questionable man's intentions really are. It ends with me sitting completely still in the seat, and then jumping up and sprinting out of the carriage onto the station, just as the doors close. Taking a quick glance back behind me as I run away, I see that this man is clearly also in a hurry to get off, but luckily, he doesn't have time before the train moves on. From here, I then run the whole distance home, in fear of meeting him on the way, as there are short distances between the last 2 stops. And here, obviously, the adrenaline did me a big favor, since my fitness these days is as absent as the toilet paper on the store shelves. Luckily, I made it home safely, albeit somewhat emotionally frayed. I quickly agree with myself that I will never again go out alone in the evening these days. And I give that notion out to every girl, or even every person out there. If you are ever isolated on public transport, stay frosty and watch out for yourself. You never know what the person sitting across from you has intentions to do. I lived in this small apartment for most of my adult life, but this story in question was made far more scary due to quarantine. You see, I'm amazed that there are not more stories about quarantine, the time where we all had to be locked up and alone. But here is mine. My apartment complex was in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by fields and a main road that led all the way to the nearby city. During lockdown, considering I live alone, I often got bored of the same video games and movie marathons that took up most of my lockdown time. So I decided to take a walk through the fields around my complex. It was pretty nice most times, but one night, it ruined my nightly ritual forever. One night, my neighbors were having a party next door. Being a little frustrated by the noise, I decided to take a walk through the fields to clear my head. Everything was going fine until I heard the sound of grass crunching behind me. I turned around and saw nothing, so I attributed it to just being some animal or something echoing down the field. But then, I kept hearing it. It sounded like it was getting closer, so I decided to stop and take a look. When I did, my dog came through the clearing. Odd. I thought I locked my door. "Come on, boy," I whistled, but he didn't come. He usually followed me, and he continued to do so I kept walking. I moved through the field with my dog until I saw my apartment come through the clearing. But then a chill ran down my spine when I saw my dog looking down at me through the window of my upstairs apartment. I froze and slowly turned around to see the dog behind me. Now that I looked at it, something seemed very off with it. I couldn't help but feel a sense of panic running down my spine. It was keeping me from moving until I snapped out of it and broke into a sprint. My neighbors were partying outside, must have thought I was a mad person or something, especially when I yanked open my apartment door and slammed it behind me. After dry heaving in a panic for about 3 minutes, I looked out my window to see the dog staring up at my apartment. My own dog started growling while he looked out the window with me at this mysterious creature as it disappeared into the fields. I don't know what it was or what was going to happen if I led it back to my apartment. What I do know is that I never went walking alone in the fields again. It later got suggested to me that it might have been a skinwalker of some kind, but I try not to give stock into myths. But myths gotta start somehow. Or maybe the isolation was driving me mad. But every now and again I hear a dog barking in the distance from those fields. Thank you for tuning in and putting up with my sick voice. So please, like and subscribe if you want more horror content. We are on a journey to 1,000 subscribers. Even if you are not subscribed, thank you for tuning in and listening to these true scary stories. Until next time.